Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Tiffany Mink, Marketing Manager for Interview Valet here. And today we are going to be talking and focusing on how nonfiction authors can leverage podcast guesting. Now, if you've been following us the last couple months, back in April, we focused our conversation toward coaches and consultants and how they can leverage podcast guesting. And then last month in May, we talked to brands and the specific needs and concerns that they may have and how they can leverage podcast guesting to grow their business and gain brand awareness. And so now today we're shifting that focus over to nonfiction authors and the unique struggles and concerns and goals that they have and how they can leverage podcast guesting. If any of these recent topics interest you, we instead of just giving you the link to one of the guides, I'm going to direct you over just a second over in the chat. I'll drop the link for our resources tab on our website. And there you can find the 3 topics I mentioned, plus many others. All of these topics typically have a live recording like this and a corresponding guide or report. And that way you can kind of select the topic that interests you and pertains to you the most. I feel like the topic of nonfiction authors and podcast guesting is a really great one because there's a lot of similarities in the goals. Typically nonfiction authors are writing with the intention of sharing their knowledge and sharing their expertise, their 10,000 hours. And oftentimes that's very similar to the goals of podcast guesting. So for me, I feel like the two go hand in hand. And we've had the opportunity to work with a lot of great authors over our time here at Interview Valet. And we actually have one of our guests, our certified guest, Peter Mutabazi, joining us today. He is the founder of the Now I Am Known Foundation. Wonderful foundation. And he's going to share how he was able to leverage podcast guesting to not only launch his book and gain awareness for his book, but also for his nonprofit organization. So looking forward to that coming up here shortly. And again, we do have the chat over there. Please use it. Why don't you let us know where you're tuning in from today? As always, I'm tuning in here from the Pacific Northwest. And in true Washington fashion, we're slightly overcast today. Let us know over in the chat. And again, if you have any questions throughout, drop those over there. We'll be collecting those. And we'll do a little Q&A discussion at the end. So we got a lot to cover today. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. And with that, we're going to bring in Interview Valet's founder and CEO, Tom Schwab. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Tiffany, I am thrilled to be here.
Yes, I enjoy this topic because the similarities between the goals with podcast guesting and nonfiction authors, right, and authoring a book are very similar, right, of sharing their expertise and everything.
They are, and I wish I could show you my bookshelf right here. So the bookshelf to my left has got all of the books that we have promoted with or helped promote with podcast interview marketing, right? Some of them have hit Wall Street Journal bestseller. Other ones have hit USA Today or bestseller. Everybody hits, Amazon bestseller right now.
Right.
But it's amazing because, people have worked so hard to get their book out there. They put their heart, their blood, their sweat, their tears into there. And then how do they get the book in front of people? The world has changed. If you build it, they will come. I don't think it ever worked. And if you write it, they will find it. Definitely doesn't work. And, pre-COVID, I guess you could do book launches, right? Going from place to place. But now more than ever, it seems like leveraging the technology is so much easier to either talk with your ideal readers or to launch the book, the clients, whatever. And so it's a powerful technology. And hopefully we'll get to talk a little bit later about AI because everything that's coming out now with AI and ChatGPT, these collaborative conversations are getting to be so much more powerful. not just for
Yes.
people, but that's what the search engines are looking for too.
Exactly. We talked earlier this week, I believe, about AI is now ironically looking for the human touch, right? In conversation like this, real time conversation, looking for almost things that make it human, so it can determine it's in fact humans real time talking and not just AI generated um, written word or even video, right? Because now you can do editing and different things that it doesn't even really have to be real people sitting here talking. And so now the program that's doing this AI generated content is now looking for the human touch. And again, that ties in. It's like podcast guests or podcasters are ahead of the curve on the trends right now, right? For SEO, they've been doing this authentic, genuine connection, genuine conversation. So, yeah, looking forward to that part of the discussion as well.
Yeah. And well, let's dive into it here. And I always say, um, start with why, right? There's a great book. Simon Sinek wrote that. Start with why. So often authors, nonfiction authors will come to us and say, I want to be on podcasts. Well, why? Right. And today we're going to be going through the why and why you want to do it, different ways that you could leverage this. And I want to start out with a quick little why here before I jump into it on why we say nonfiction authors, right? So we've been doing this for 9 years. We have tried fiction, right? And it just doesn't do well off of podcast interviews, right? You don't have to know the author in order to enjoy the book, right?
Right.
And often with a fiction book, there's no back end to it, right? So nonfiction books often have coaching, consulting, a movie, something bigger to that along with it. Um, and so with that, it's so much easier to monetize, right? And that's why we always say nonfiction author. So if you're a fiction author, some of this will apply, but just don't expect to get great return on investment from you, because we always want to get our clients, 10x return on investment of their time and their money. And we've only seen that you can do that off of nonfiction books.
Right. It goes back to the similarities in the goal there.
Right.
But okay, are you ready to get started? I will hop off and let you take it over.
I will.
All right.
So let me add this to it. We're going to walk through each one of these, right? How you can use targeted podcast interviews. And the first one is, what if you've got a book that's just starting to come out? What if, yeah, too many things there. What if you've got a book that's just starting to come out, right? You want to get the pre-orders out there, either to hit a list, to show that the publisher that you're serious about this. Sharon Spano did a great job of this. Most of the time we tell authors start, 3 to 4 months before the book launches, right? Because the best podcasts are like doctors' offices or restaurants. If there's not a reason, they've got a waiting list, there's a reason you don't want to be there, right? So if you're trying to time it so that all of your interviews come out, start about 3 to 4 months early. But Sharon started even earlier. She started about 6 months because she wanted to get pre-orders for her book. She wanted to practice speaking to audiences. And not only did she, launch the book great with a lot of pre-orders, but she also was able to get her message down. She was able to figure out she really liked this. And by the time the book came out, she also was working on a podcast of her own, right? So another one here. How about launching an entire business from it, right? Chris Tuff wrote a great book called The Millennial Whisperer, right? This is the guy that was known in his agency is that he could work with all the millennials, right? So he wrote this book, and his goal for the book was not just to sell the books, right? And this hit USA Today bestseller. But what he was trying to do was launch a consultancy off of it too, right? He wanted to talk with the Coca-Colas, the Home Depots. He's out of Atlanta. There's a lot of great businesses there. He wanted to be known as the person to go to to launch that entire consulting business. And he did that great. And one of the little spin-offs off of this is, much like Chicken Soup for the Soul, he actually went on to some podcasts and they asked him, "Hey, this would be a great book. Could we write like the Millennial Whisperer for dentists, the Millennial Whisperer for real estate agents?" And so they were able to do some spin-off books on that. Also, once again, just tapping into different audiences. So, what if you don't like to travel? What if traveling is hard for you? What if every time you travel, you have to have someone that comes along with you, right? And that was the situation for Eric Weinheimer. So Eric is the first blind man to summit Mount Everest, and he's also the first blind man to go down the Grand Canyon in a kayak solo. I'm not going to give you the answers on how he did that amazing story. He's also has a Netflix series out there, right? So he wanted to get this message out for his book, No Barriers, A Blind Man's Journey, right? But for him to go from place to place to give keynotes, and he does this, but it's tough, right? Traveling for him, being blind is difficult. But he wanted to get the word out about the podcast, or excuse me, on the book. So he came to us and wanted to use podcasts. And it was so great that he was able to stay at home, and between while he was climbing and working out, he was able to do these great podcast interviews. And he would actually get everything set up, or his kids would get it set up beforehand and set up the entire computer. And he was able to do the interview. He was able to talk to tens of thousands of people without having to travel. And great man, great book. And we were thrilled to be a part of that. Today, I'm living here in West Michigan today. It's a beautiful time to be here. I don't want to travel all around. I'd much rather stay home, enjoy the weather, and talk to thousands of people, or tens of thousands from here. So how about different ways? What if you're a professor, right? What if you've gotten this great book out there that talks all about entrepreneurship? What if you teach entrepreneurship at Indiana University, right? Kelley School of Business. That's what Todd and Kim Saxton were. They wrote a great book called The Titanic Effect: How to Successfully Navigate Uncertain Times That Sink Most Startups. Now, they wanted to go out and talk about what they had learned in the research, but they also wanted to talk about the program that they were teaching at Kelley School of Business. And they were able to do both. And it's interesting, what's ordinary to you is amazing to other people. And they were sharing with me that when U.S. News and World Report gives those rankings of the top schools and the best schools, a large portion of that is how influential the professors are. And, influential 30 years ago, heck, maybe 20 years ago, was how often you published in a peer-reviewed journal. Now they're out there talking and saying how influential are the staff, the professors. And one of the things they look at is keynotes. How much are they on social media? How much are they interviewed? And podcast interviews are now a social signal for U.S. News and World Report that, hey, this professor is in demand, right? And so you think about it. If someone's thinking about going to the Kelley School of Business, right? Friend of mine, Cole Raven, over at Podchasers, an alumni there. Well, when they Google that, right, different things are going to come up. And if you can find the professors talking about entrepreneurship, right, that would be a great place to say, hey, here's a school that I want to check out. So even academics are using this. Well, how are some other ways that people are using? Well, we talked about travel before. What if travel not only means jumping in a plane, but jumping in a plane for like 24 hours, because you've got to go to a different continent on the other side of the world? And that's what it was for Tristan White. Tristan is known in Australia, right? He is the culture guy down there. While everybody else was trying to figure out how to work with a remote team during COVID, Tristan had figured this out already. You see, he runs the largest physio group um, in Australia, right? And for in the US, the States, we would call this a physical therapy group. Well, if you're running in the United States, you can probably, drive from office to office, but Australia is different where it's an entire continent. The difference between Sydney and Melbourne to Perth is huge, right? You just don't drive from one side to the other. You just don't get everybody together for a team meeting. And he was able to build this culture. And so he was well known in Australia, New Zealand. He was even known in the EO community, the Entrepreneurs Organization, where he's well known. But he wanted to break into the US market. And, getting on a plane away from his family to do talks for months on end wasn't a viable option. The other thing, too, is that the currency fluctuation really influenced his opinion. So if he got students on for his course, the US dollar was much stronger than the Australian dollar at that time. And I think it still is. And so he wanted to go outside and tap into a different audience. So he was able to come and do podcasts focused on the US market, get US followers, get US clients, get US consulting, and he was able to do it all online there. So really think about it. If you're trying to break into a different market, that could be a geography, it could be just a different vertical, right? You can do that very, very targeted based on podcast interviews, right? This idea that all of my customers have to live within driving distance of me, or all of my readers have to live within driving distance to me is not the limitation anymore. So another one here. Um, Peter is an amazing man. I'm so glad that you get to meet him. And he'll be on here probably in about 15 minutes. So Peter is an amazing man, and he'll tell a little bit of his story here. But he talks for Care International. He's a world-renowned speaker here, and he wrote his own book. It's called Now I Am Known: How a Street Kid Turned Foster Dad Found Acceptance and True Worth. Right? It's an amazing story. It's unbelievable, and he's the only one that can tell it. Right? If I told it, it would be like, no way. Right? What he did from such an early age to where he's become, and that all that he went through, that his heart is still open. It's unbelievable. Well, he's also got this book, right? Now I Am Known, and it was featured on national news and national media, but not everybody sees it, right? Just because you're on the morning show on Sunday morning on national news, if you don't see that, your chances of finding that are slim, right? And so Peter wanted to get it out there, tell his story, talk about the foster care system, talk about how it's broken, what you can do to support that, right? And not only being a foster parent, but supporting foster parents. So he was able to strategically go on different podcasts, right? And he's a foster dad. He's got, I want to say, is it my, I think the last I heard was 9 kids at home, right? I thought it was hard to travel when I had a couple kids at home. It's even harder for him. He's their only parent. So he can't just go everywhere. And he was able not only to get his book out there, to get his story out there, he was able to get support for his nonprofit there. And I'm so excited that Peter's going to be with us here in a little bit. So think of what bigger things you could do with your book. Is there a nonprofit you could support? Is there some vision that you could tie your book to? Because people want to engage with you there. Jeffrey Shaw, if you listen to podcasts, you may know Jeffrey. Jeffrey is the host of the Self-Employed Life Great, great podcast. It's one of the top business podcasts where he talks to people that have gone from um, more of the corporate world to working for themselves and being self-employed. We've helped Jeffrey now with 2 books, right? He's got his own podcast. He can reach his own audience, but how do you reach other audiences? How do you reach out to them? And so we've helped him with 2 books now that he has launched. And I love how he talks about you can tap into different audiences. He called it the Dory Clark method. He's a friend of Dory, going everywhere and being on different places and time shifting it too. Right when the book came out, he knew that he was going to do some launch parties. He was going to do TV. He was going to do radio. But with the podcast being pre-recorded, right, he was able to start that 3 or 4 months beforehand, get that book out there, get the spin, get his message down for it, do all of that work beforehand, and then able to go out and launch his entire brand with it. This is one of my grandkids' favorite authors, and David Rendell wrote a book called The Freak Factor, and I'd encourage you to just Google him. So David is probably about 6'8". I'm guessing he's probably about 160 pounds, right? He was always a freak. And that's what kids called him as a kid, right? It could be hurtful. And then he embraced it. And he's like, what makes us different makes us amazing. And so as you can see, it's like, no, I did not put the cover upside down. He is upside down on the cover, right? It's in pink. That's the color he walks around in because he wants to be different and he wants to get this message out. And he lives in North Carolina with his family, and he travels around talking about, what makes you different, makes you amazing, what that's your superpower. And he has talked throughout the world, the Middle East, in Europe, in North America. He's done a TED Talk based on this, and getting that message out. When you hear his story, it's almost like, oh, I got to see what this guy looks like. And it was a great way of driving people back to his website and to get his book, right? And he also wrote a kid's book. It's The Freak Factor for Kids. And my grandkids love this book. And he talks about his story and asks them the question, have you ever felt different? And then he talks about that as his words are, the weirdest kids make the most interesting adults. And so they start to go, yeah, I'm different. And that's great. And he was able to get website traffic, get listeners, right? Carrie Wilkerson talks about her list grew 10 times as fast after she started to do podcast interview marketing. But he was also able to land speaking gigs. And these aren't free gigs. These were keynotes where they were paying him big bucks and his airfare and lodging to Dubai. And so it was able to get that out there. And this is one of the reasons that we'll talk to authors about having an audiobook available also, right? Because the studies show, and Tim Sanders from Love is the Killer app and Deal Storming, he talked to us about that he sold more Audible books based on being on podcasts, right? They would buy the Audible book first, then they'd buy the physical book, right? And they'd highlight it. Maybe they'd buy it for people for gifts. Maybe they would buy a dozen for the executive board. Maybe they would all read it before they invited him to talk to the board or talk at a keynote. And so by giving people a Audible version, especially if it's written, or excuse me, if it's narrated by the author, gives them a great chance to that try before you buy, right? Think about it. Now I lost the name of it. Oh, I can picture him right now, but I can't think of his name. He's written lots of great book. He talks about the 10,000 hours, all of those other things. And I've heard him speak at at conferences. Or let's go back to the one I used at the beginning, Simon Sinek, right? Start with why. Simon read his own book. Now, is he the best narrator in the world? Probably not, right? But it would seem weird if I heard somebody else, Jane, uh, a professional narrator, if I heard them read his book and then I heard Simon Sinek up on the keynote, I'd be like, that's different. So if you have a book, especially if it's a nonfiction book and you want to speak, I highly, highly recommend um, narrating it yourself and having an audible version of it. And if you're ever looking for people to do that, feel free to reach out to me. David Wolf at Audivita is the person that I use to do the audio version of my book. I didn't have to travel. It was super easy, and they got it done very, very quickly. So what if you want your book translated into different languages, right? Not everybody listens to podcasts. Not everybody speaks English. But the more exposure you get out there, people think, oh, could we translate this? And it's so easy. The book has already been written. All you have to do is find somebody to translate it. And that's what Steve Anderson did. The Bezos Letters. Steve is out of Franklin, Tennessee, and he wrote this great book talking about the lessons that can be gained from Jeff Bezos's letters, right? Letters to shareholders. Great, great book. Morgan James published it. Wall Street Journal bestseller. And as he was out there talking about it on different podcasts, he had a few people reached out to him and said, are you going to have this available in Korean? And Steve was like, I didn't know there was that much of a Korean market. I think it was 5 different languages within the first year. People reached out to him to have it translated to it. And what happens here, and I wasn't aware of this, is they actually buy the rights to it and they license it. So you're not getting just paid on the sales, right? And if you know how books work, you get paid on the sales a long, long, long time after the book sells, right? And they do a big holdback. No, when they translate it to a different language, they do licensing rights on it. So there's an upfront payment, and typically there's a long tail to it. So when people started asking him to license the book for different languages, especially early on, the licensing early on was more powerful or more lucrative early on than even the book sales. And you can, always talk about to your publisher about that also. So what if you've got a new idea that you're having out there, right? Early on, we worked with a gentleman by the name of Christopher Lochhead. He co-authored a book called Play Bigger. He's got 2 new books that are coming out. We're working with him on both of those. The 22 Laws of Category Design Marketing. And then he's got another book coming out this fall talking about the importance of the creator economy, right? It used to be white collar was the knowledge economy. Well, now AI has pretty much taken over knowledge, right? If I need to know something, I can ask AI. But this idea of creation and creativity, that is where the new economy is going. And Christopher and his co-authors, the Category Pirates, I love them. They have that idea out there, and they'll be bringing that out. And so really his is talking about category creation and demand creation, not just demand capture, right? If I write a book called The Idiot's Guide to Pinterest, right? Well, first of all, I'm not writing that because that's a trademarked thing of Wiley. They have or it's not the idiot, it's the dummy's guide to that. Maybe I should start the idiot's guide. That is demand capture, right? If people are looking for Pinterest, right? Oh, this book pops up. So that's demand capture. What Christopher's talking about is demand creation, right? Nobody was talking about what's a book about category design. No, he had to go out there and teach the market about that. If he wanted to be the category king or the category queen in that, he needed to go out and talk about it. He needed to teach them these new ideas. Uh, Christopher Lockhead is also the one that called the book that I wrote, Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with a Targeted Interview Strategy. He's the one that said it's the Bible of podcast guesting. And he really encouraged me to write that book and then promote it, right? Because people were talking about early on how to be a podcast host, right? And I'm like, well, there's a other side of that, right? There's podcast guesting, and it's not just about being a guest, it's about podcast interview marketing. And he really helped us with that, that said, you've got to have the book out there. You've got to be talking about it in order to establish yourself. So when people Google, category design, Christopher pops up. When they Google podcast interview marketing, right? Interview valet and the book show up there. So it's a powerful, powerful way to do that. What if you just want more followers, right? What if you want to get known by more people? Well, I guess if you're Brendan Kane, you can use podcast interviews for that, but he's already known by lots of people. He wrote a book called 1 Million Followers, and he was able to get 1 million followers, true people, not bots, anything like that, on social media. And he wrote this book, 1 Million Followers, to show how he did it. But he still wanted to go out there and get more people, right? He had his million that followed him, but the way he looked at it, that's still in the United States left over 300 million people that had never heard of him. And so he wanted to tap into new audiences with this. Katie Couric, lots of people know her. She wrote the endorsement for his book there because Brendan was the one that really taught her how to use social media to get the followers. And he actually reached out to us to learn how to use podcast interview marketing to gain more readers for his book, more followers. And we were so touched by that. We helped him on his first book. We helped him on his second book, and Hook Point is the name of his second book. It's How to Get Noticed in a 3-second world. And he actually talks about his experience with podcast interviews on his previous book, and actually talks about us in there as a way that that was a great way as a hook point here. So we've talked about a lot of different ways to do it. And this next one is probably one of the most creative things I have heard somebody say of why they wanted to do a podcast interview tour for their book. So Norma Joyce Dougherty, she wrote a book called Island Girl, A Triumph of the Spirit. Now, it's a memoir, right? So it's like, is it fiction? Is it nonfiction? If she was just trying to sell books, I would have told her this is going to be a tough way to do it, right? But her story was so engaging. It was so targeted. It was so uplifting, right? That we looked at it and said, this falls in line with our mission. And she had a bigger purpose on it. So pre-COVID, she had launched the book. The book did great. And someone had bought the rights for the movie, right? And she wanted to see it made into a movie. So during COVID, when everything started to slow down, right? She's like, I don't want people to forget about this. I don't want them to forget about me or my book or how this can change people's lives. So she went out there on podcast interviews. She kept her message going out there. Sales of the book continued, and the moving it forward into a book, or excuse me, into a movie, is continued to move forward into this. And I can't wait. This will be the first, I guess, movie from a book that we can say that we've promoted on this. So there's 12 ideas on how you could use this. And I want to jump to something real quick here, because it's not about the book, it's not about the interview, right? I would ask you, if you wrote this book, your book was not written just to write a book, right? My guess is that you wrote it to help people, right? To share what you've learned, you know, blessed to be a blessing. And that's what we look at, right? It's not about the podcast interview. It's about the results, the impact that you can make with every interview, right? Our mission is to personally introduce inspiring thought leaders to millions of people they could serve for the betterment of all. And I remember telling this to my mom years ago, and my mom's 82. She doesn't know what a podcast is, right? But she said, that mission, what's that have to do with a podcast? And I'm like, it's not about the podcast. What it's really about is the impact it can make, right? It's the same way with a book. It's not about just a book. It's about the impact that the book can make, right? And it doesn't help anyone if you write a book and then nobody reads it. Nobody knows about it, right? Obscurity is our biggest problem. It's not that people can't be helped by your book. It's just that they don't know your book exists, right? There's so many books out there. So you need to do something to get the message out there. And I believe that one of the easiest ways, the most powerful ways today to do that is through a podcast interview. And I want to bring Tiffany back on here also and talk a little bit um, about the changes that AI has made to this recently.
Yes, like we kind of touched on earlier, of just the search engine algorithms and what it's looking for and how it's pinging, real human created content versus AI created content. How it looks for you to have someone else in the photo, another person that has an identity online, right?
Mhm.
And then you don't even have to tag that person. It recognizes them as being there. And then that gives you favorability in SEO and social media algorithms and different things. And what that means for us, I think, is that it's moving toward collaborative content. It's favoring that, and right in line with podcast interviews and podcast guesting, right?
Yeah.
Um,
The,
yeah,
the sad part today is that, AI has made content so easy to put out there, right? And there's so much non-obvious or obvious junk that's just a rehash of it, right? And so what's happening now, and I actually learned this from Dennis Wu. Um, Known him for years. He's speaking at Social Media Marketing World, Mike Stelzner's conference. But Dennis was on a podcast recently, and he was talking about how the search engines look at all of us right now. And it's sad, but it's true. The search engines look at everything as you're a liar, you're a cheat, you're a bot, right? And that's where they start with. And they've got to, right? Because people are just putting up stuff straight from Chat GPT, right? And so they're starting with that this is fake, this is from a bot. And then they're looking for signals that say this is real, right? And Tiffany, you mentioned some of those, like in pictures. If you've noticed, if you've got a picture that's got someone else in it, it tends to do better, right? On social media and everything, right? And because wow, if Tom is with Tiffany, we know Tiffany is real. And so let's promote Tom to Tiffany's audience too, right?
right.
The other one is they know the meta tags, right? Um, and so they can tell, is this photoshopped, right? Um, and then also the idea of it's got to be human, right? So if it's perfect, right? If both Tiffany and I are talking and just got a Peter will be here in a second. Tiffany, I just got a chat here say he's having trouble logging in, so we'll see if we can share that link with him again. But if Tiffany and I are talking, right, I don't talk in full sentences. I say we talk over each other. So as the search engines are looking at that, watching that, listening to that, and they are listening, right? Everybody knows that, right? As they hear that, they're like, oh, that's not perfect. That must be real. And so one of the things that we're seeing now, and the SEO search engine companies, they don't tell you exactly how they do it. It's more like, hey, we see what's happening and this is what we can infer from that. And that's what Dennis was saying, is that anytime you have collaborative content, right? So that could be two people in a video, two people in a picture, two people talking like in a podcast interview, that the search engines look at that as more human, more real, and they're looking for signals to tell people, yeah, this is real. This is good content. We should promote this over, the thousands of blogs that Chat GPT just wrote in the last minute.
Right. Yeah, and it's amazing. And we've known for a long time that like social media algorithms has preferred video, like the short form video over just text posts, right? And now it's just kind of evolving into that. They want to make sure you're real. They want to, like you said, if they catch you talking over a little bit, a stutter, a mispronunciation of a word, a bot's not going to do that. So I'm checking.
Yeah, and if anybody's have any questions, put them in the chat there. We will answer those as we're waiting for Peter to get on here. And there was also Tiffany had mentioned something about a 13th way that you could use podcast interviews. Tiffany, if you can say that, I'll expand on it a little bit.
Of course. Yeah, as I was putting this together and getting ready for today, it occurred to me there is another way, a unique way. And this question came up before of, what if I don't have my book yet, right? What if I have a goal of writing a book, and where do you begin, right? How do you sit down and write a 200 plus page document? You have all the information in your head, you have the expertise, you know the material inside and out, but how do you get pen to paper, right? We have a great example of that. One of our clients, Xander Sprague, he reverse engineered writing his book, right? He went on, he wrote out the outline for his book, kind of chapter basis topics for his book. Epic begins with one step forward. And he did a series of podcast interviews where each interview, he covered a topic from a chapter from his book, and took that content and worked backwards from it. He transcribed the interviews. He, now he has it written out, and then he went in and chose and edited it from spoken word to written word. I know you worked with with Xander, right, Tom?
I did.
Mm-hmm. Great book. I think the team all got a copy of his book, and I personally enjoyed it. It's sitting on my bookshelf over there. And what was his experience like, Tom? Do you know of how he kind of laid out that plan? How did that come about?
Yeah, and it's interesting because he reverse engineered it. He started to come with, hey, here's the ideas I have for each chapter. And then he started to talk through those on the podcast interview. And when people asked him the questions, he was able to dig in that a little bit more and for more content there. And yeah, it's a great way to do it. I had seen Jeff Madoff in Creative Careers do that, where he had 13 chapters, and each chapter could have been its own standalone book. So when he started to do interviews, he would just do it on one chapter, whereas Xander did it almost on the flip side there. So it's a very interesting way to do that. So I'm going to stop
Exactly.
talking here because there's a man that is much, much more interesting than I am, right? And he's got a neater accent too. So I'm going to pass it
Yes,
over to you,
we
Tiffany,
all love Peter.
and I can't
Um,
wait to listen from Peter.
well, I think before we bring in Peter, we need to bring in his client account manager who worked his liaison, his concierge here at Interview Valet, and that is Jessica Morgan. So I'm going to pop her in first and introduce her. Hi, Jessica.
Hello.
Jessica's one of our favorite client account managers here. She is great at getting things done, and she worked with Peter. And like I said, she was the one that handled his interviews with us. And so we thought, Jessica, it would make sense since you worked directly with Peter that maybe you and him could share his experience.
Of course.
Of leveraging podcast interviews. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in Peter. Hi, Peter.
Peter.
Hey, how are you? Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, I'm so sorry you were having difficulty logging in, Peter. I'm sorry about that. I will go ahead and I'll pop off and I will let you and Jessica take it away. And if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and let us know who you are and about your organization, and you can take it from there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, my name is Mutabazi, and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. My whole goal or my whole life is to really advocate for children, especially the most vulnerable. I'm a single foster dad, an adoptive dad. I have 6 children, and it's fun. You know, no boring day in my house.
Definitely, Peter. So we've all had the pleasure of getting to know you. It's been so fun getting to work with you, and you've added a couple since we last talked. I saw that.
Yes. As of last weekend, yes.
Okay, that's fantastic. So we've been talking today a little bit about how nonfiction authors can leverage podcast interviews. And so can you share a little bit about how this practice specifically has helped you promote your book and the Now I Am Known Foundation?
Yes, as you all know, that I've written a book and it's sold a good copies, but I would attribute most of it from the podcast. For me, what I learned or what really helped me was that you can specifically cater to who the specific person is listening to you, because each podcast is different. So it was really neat for me to have different interviews, and I'm sharing the same message, but I'm really more sharing towards every audience that was different from the other. So to me, that was fun to learn about myself, about my book, but too, it was a joy in some way to learn. It's more like a bookshelf where you pick one and then you go the next. And I think for me, that's how I felt like I can go to shelf B because the audience shelf B belonged there. And that was really easy for me to learn the audience because I knew who I was speaking to.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've obviously, as Tom mentioned before, you've been showcased on a lot of different media. I know Good Morning America, Upworthy, you've been on a lot. And there's a lot of routes that authors can take to promote their book. Can you tell us a little bit about what might have, intrigued you about podcast interview marketing and ultimately made you decide to go that route?
Well, I think after I met you guys, I think the clientele on how you treat people, on how you work with people, the details that you have, like I've never seen them anywhere else. And I think for me it was like, well, I have to work with them, knowing that the talents, but also to the opportunities that you had for me to find, podcasts that fit my style or fit my audience. It was easy for me to work with you because it was that easy.
Right. So during previous conversations and such, there is something I just want to touch on, that the immediate result that you saw from a podcast interview. And it's something that I know made me tear up. I know it made you tear up, pretty much made everybody on our team tear up. And so can you tell us a little bit about something that you received immediately during a podcast interview and how that impacted you, your foundation, and all of that?
Well, absolutely, yes. And I didn't tell you actually most of it,
Okay.
But one particular one was, the podcast interviewers really get to know your life, and you get to really explain about you, and there's an instant connection there. So one gentleman, as he was interviewing me, he's like, what would you need today? I'm like, I need a car. He's like, okay, sure, I would donate $10,000 right now so you can help me. I was like, wait a minute. And that for me really, struck me of the kindness, but too on the willingness to truly share the resources they have with us who didn't have those resources. So it was really neat. But also I met someone else who later listened to one of my podcasts, say, hey, I have 10 grand for you so it can help you, and that for me really has encouraged me in so many different ways. But also too, that I have stayed in touch with most of my interviews, those who interviewed me, that they still check in, they still make sure that, what do you need? For example, I had a GoFundMe this last 2 weeks, but most of them really use that to help us, and we met our goal. So for me, they were more blessing than just sending the books, but the connection that went beyond what the interviews were all about.
Absolutely. And Peter, your story is so inspiring. I almost don't even want to get too deep into it because I want everybody to go buy your book. But I do know something that I had noticed, and I'm not sure, I'm not saying this is completely attributed to podcast interviews, but when you joined with Interview Valet, I believe your Instagram following was like 205,000. I was looking at it and you're at 302,000. So I feel like some of that could possibly be contributed or attributed to podcast interviews as well. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Because I get to really get people who get to talk to me and say, hey, but they DM, they're like, by the way, I got to listen to you on a podcast and I came and followed you, And then the cool thing with podcasts too, is they're alive at all time. It's not just the 1 week they were posted, but people go back to, to the previous recordings you did. And so for me, sometimes like even this morning, I had someone say like, I just listened to you. And I'm like, wait, what? So it's amazing just that the podcast are more like a bank where people go back for resources that have been, tapped before. And I think for my audience, it's been really a privilege that they are learning more about me through podcasts that you've done for me.
Absolutely. And I mean, most of those podcasts have gone live months ago. So that's pretty cool to have somebody come back and say that they heard you recently. And so we always say it's evergreen content, which is so fantastic. So you've pretty much touched on this a lot, but why do you think personally, Tom went over a bunch of different ways that people can leverage podcast interviews for nonfiction authors, but why do you personally believe that podcast guesting is great for nonfiction authors and that it's something that, everyone should utilize and have the opportunity to leverage?
I've been on televisions, I've been on radios, I've been on, where you're in, you're basically you're facing your audience. But the podcast for me, I love the laid back of where I had to explain a little bit more. Sometimes you're interviewed about your child, but you end up really talking of what life became for you later. So for me, I love that because it exposes you to more things that you never thought you could do, or you had room to, to really share. So the podcast is able to truly take that, and I like that they take 1 hour to interview you, but pick up the most things, they need for the final product, which, on television, I have 2 minutes. That's all I have, But on podcast, there's that more intimate, and the connection as well. It's different if I was being interviewed by a mom, or different if I was being interviewed by 2 dads, that I had an opportunity in some way to really tell my story in a different way. So I would say, absolutely. I learned about myself. I learned about marketing, but also I learned how well to tell my story or my book because of the opportunities from the podcast.
That's fantastic. And so we've pretty much touched on a lot of this, but how would you say it's more unique from other marketing strategies that you've used to grow your foundation and promote your book?
Oh, wow. It's unique in everywhere. As I said, intimate. There's that really connection between you and whoever is interviewing you, that it literally it's like you're sitting in the kitchen with someone you've never met, but interested in you, that get to know about you and dig things that you never thought you could share, and really help the audience to understand you. That's something I love, that I felt I was talking to a friend, but along the way, it was actually talking to thousands and thousands, the way they made me feel, but also the way they made me tell my story in a ways that I would not have done in any other outlets.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so fun to listen to you and get to hear everything. And I'm sure it's also fantastic because you don't have to travel. You've been able to kind of fit in those interviews around your kids' schedule. And I know you're toting them all over the place all the time. So do you have any last comments or anything you want to share with us, Peter?
I think for me, working with you has been probably the greatest. The way you articulate, the way you're on time, the way you helped me even understand the best way things I didn't know. That you said, hey, you and Tommy, you're like, hey, by the way, you have amazing story, and we can help you shape it the way it should. So for me, it wasn't just me getting opportunity to speak, but it was training that I really love the most. So if you're out there and you want to learn, I think you're the best people that can teach others, especially Tom. He's been in this business for a long time, that he really knows in every way, shape, form to guide you, to lead you, to read your story and carry it to the way it should be. To me, that was the best part I can say.
Absolutely. They call him the podcasting godfather for reasons. I think that's what they call him. Fairy
Right.
godfather, something like that. They call him that for a reason. So awesome.
Yeah, Peter, again, we just all love you here. We're all big fans of Peter at Interview Valet. I can attest personally. I listened to your interview with Christopher Lockhead on Marketing. And before the interview was over, I personally went out and purchased your book online. So it works, right? A fan right here in real time.
Because you're able to touch that personal level, that heart level. And Peter, you're very good at tapping into that. Like, I need to know more. I need to know Peter's story. And so it's definitely worked in my corner as well.
Right. It leaves you hungry for more. It's just enough of it, that intimate conversation, like you said, Peter, that it's enough to really dive into it. It's not a 2-minute segment on TV, right? It's enough to dive into it, but then also enough to leave them wanting more and wanting to take that next step.
Right.
And if someone listens to you for 30, 45 minutes plus on an interview, they've already kind of opted in to your message, your ideas, your what you have to offer, right?
Right. Absolutely. And also the other part that you did that was amazing was you connected me with the podcasters who were asking me, but they saw more about me that I didn't see, Yes, Chris, Tom, like we're working a little bit more products or more things that I never thought I could. But they saw the potential by really having that intimate time with me in a podcast setting where I felt like, yes, I was with a friend at a coffee shop, that they got to know more about me. And that's, I think, for me, what really made me excel in doing what I'm doing and selling books, but too in doing better in ways that I didn't know I knew how.
Peter, you continue to amaze me. What's ordinary to you is amazing to others. And I know that you're a professional speaker. You give keynotes, all the rest of that. And I want to find out, like, when you're somewhere even close to me so I can meet you in real life. But how is the interview or the discussion different than a keynote? Because I know a lot of people, would be intimidated if they're like, here's a microphone, go talk for 45 minutes. How does the standing up there by yourself compare to just doing a podcast interview?
Oh, I mean, the tension, the preparation that goes in, the fear of people right in front of you, all that, it creates more of your limits of what you can say or what you can do because you've been structured on what you can say, that timing. But for podcasts, I love the way it really works. You at home, you relax, and you're able to really go in details in places that I would never do while, in a speaking event. That I love so much. But the other part too, they're experts in what they know what they're asking you. That sometimes they will take you places that I didn't really think through, that I could never do, being a keynote speaker. So for me, that really helped me understand their audience because they know their audience better and they're able to draw you and carry you to their audience that sometimes that I didn't know I had. Moms, I'm a dad. But moms know better, but they get to interview me and take me as a mom to their audience of moms as well. So for me, that was unique and amazing.
Well, thank you for all you do, all you are, and all you inspire there. So with that, I'm going to let Tiffany, wrap this up, and thank you again, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Oh, that was so great. Again, we are all just such fans of Peter here at an Interview Valet. We enjoy him so much. And I was so glad that he is with his busy schedule and his children, that he was able to hop on with us for a few minutes today. Now, as we've talked over the last, as I shared in the beginning, I talked about our last couple months and how we've talked specifically to coaches and consultants. We've talked about brands, and now today we've talked about nonfiction authors. Oftentimes there's an overlap between nonfiction authors and those other verticals. And again, I shared earlier the resources page. Please go over there and find which topic applies best to you. Lots of free resources and guides and trainings over there. And now, as we've kind of wrapped up this specific series that we've done, we're going to enter into the summer months and July and August. And typically during those months, we kind of take it down a notch and we go over, we enter into the foundations of podcast guesting. So please look forward to those. We will be doing mini lives, and we'll be talking about the basics, how to get on a podcast, your podcast one sheet, and how the key elements it needs to have. A podcast interview welcome page, what they are and why you should be using them with your interviews. Podcast recording equipment. We've had a lot of clients over the last 9 years, a lot of testing. So we've really ironed out the kinks of those basics of podcast guesting, how to get into it, best practices. And so stay tuned for those in the coming weeks. And again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you next time.